Hello, welcome to another edition of the Gratiaen PODS, supported by the British Council. Today we've got a couple of us who have done similar books, although very different books in other ways. My co-panelist is Sunela Jayewardene, author of Line of Lanka and Ravan's Lanka, which is so hot off the presses. It hasn't even been launched in Sri Lanka yet at the time of this recording. I'm Fidel Fernando, author of Upon a Sleepless Isle. So now I wanted to start our session by asking a little bit about the genre that we've both kind of found our way into, which is broadly speaking travelogue, though even that doesn't quite capture, I think, what any of these books are. Travelogue's not really a vogue genre at the moment in 2024. People often get their travel information from YouTube videos or podcasts or TikTok, but we're still doing the old school thing of writing about travel in long form books. What were your first inspirations in writing both of your books?
Well, I think I've always enjoyed traveling, and then I keep notes. Initially, I used to carry little notebooks around, and now I just do little voice recordings. I'm trying to catch up with this, TikTok age, but and I think it's just I get so fascinated by what I hear on the road that I have to document it, and it sort of grew into a series of essays, which then became the Line of Lanka, which came out in 2017, then Ravana's Lanka is also, I suppose, a historical travelogue, and that also because in terms of our stories are embedded in the geography, and to tell them you have to give it a context, and I think that's what has almost inadvertently slipped me into a travel writer.
Right, yeah. I think similar things for me. Always loved traveling, always wanted to travel for a living, which I sort of managed to do with cricket writing, because you get to travel a lot. But the things that you're exposed to and the stories that you encounter while on the road, I think, was something that I really wanted to write about and to process. And for me, it was also quite personal. I grew up during the war where you couldn't travel around Sri Lanka. So in the 90s, my parents would never take us anywhere. You'd see Yala or Trinco or Mannar or Jaffna, and none of these places were, you'd look at them on a map as a kid, and none of these places were accessible. Even just to go, into the middle of Colombo, or we used to live in a place called Krimatiani. Even to go 20 kilometers, you had to go through 3 military checkpoints. And so when it opened up and I came back to live here, we lived overseas for a while. It was just, it had already become a little bit of a tourist hotspot, and all these foreigners were visiting all these places that I'd never got to go to. And so I just basically put on a backpack and then went off without much of a plan for 8 weeks. But I knew I was gonna write a book out of it. But I think it's probably something you mentioned in one of our chats earlier was that you write for kind of vagabonds and wanderers, and you find yourself feeling that way about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've often been told by my parents first, and then I think by many friends that I'm a wanderer and a vagabond, and this whole architectural hat is sort of sits a little askew on my head. But what is interesting is I've realized that there are lots of other people who want to be wanderers and vagabonds, and besides having friends who always want to join me on my mad escapades, they, I think, sort of jump the bounds of a regular family trip, because hear something about some ruin on top of a rock, or I'll hear something about some strange ritual which happens only every 5 years, and then I'll drag everyone at 2 in the morning to, through some back roads. But what I realize is people actually do enjoy it. They just need some hand holding.
Yeah.
And then, of course, when I wrote The Line of Lanka, I realized that there are lots of people who, besides my friends, who you could say friends because they are birds of a feather, but there are other people who really, started traveling on their own, looking for the places that I had mentioned, and funnily enough, a lot of young people. And that also may be the fact that they also grew up during the war when these places were inaccessible. I mean, 2017, when The Line of Lanka came out, suddenly they realized they could go to these places. There's a sense of freedom, even the places that were accessible. As you said, you no longer needed to go through 3 military checkpoints to go on your sort of standard grocery shopping. So then you could go to all these other places which had long been sort of beyond all our lives. Mm-hmm. So I think, I think besides me being a wanderer, there are lots of other wanderers who, I think that's what they tap into, and that's probably the same with your book as well. Everyone wants to either fall out of a tuk-tuk or...
Yeah, there are a lot more misadventures, I think, in my book than there were in Line of Lanka, at least. Let's hold up Line of Lanka just so everyone kind of can see what it looks like. This is the book. The one thing I was really struck by that when I read that book, and I actually read it for the first time after I had written Upon a Sleepless Isle. So it was, and it felt like I was, we had both written on the same country, but it was almost like we hadn't written on the same country. We'd written on different countries because the way you saw things was so different from the way I saw things, and the things about Sri Lanka that you had kind of reached into and drawn out were so different from my way of doing things. And I think partly maybe that comes from, this is writing books is kind of our second job or career that we're doing. You were an architect for so many years. I wonder how that shaped your view of the land and the places that you traveled to, and how that shaped your book.
So there are a couple of things you're saying there, but before anything, this is Andrew's book, which won the Gratiaen Prize in 2019. 2019? Yeah. This is him falling out of a tuk-tuk. I think, the fact is that, yes, it seems like we are writing about 2 different countries, because I think we travel very differently. I've had enough tuk-tuk adventures myself, and I think in The Line of Lanka I did mention in Delft how we got stranded, but I think we travel differently, not because of a mode of transport, but more because I think you look at it more in a sort of a broader landscape, and I'm sort of diving deep into particular aspects of Sri Lanka. And so there I think is sort of a different strata that I'm plumbing. So that may be what it is. So it comes across as 2 different countries, but then at the same time I see you picking up like my sort of anti-colonial angst. You have the same thing, and that really resonated because we are definitely a society which has colonial baggage, whether we like it or not, but yes, there is also this very deep resentment of what was done and what was taken.
Yeah. And I mean, that resentment also lingers in parts of the country much more than it does maybe in Colombo. And it's, you find when you encounter it, it's impossible to ignore. It's impossible not to think about and write about. But you mentioned, that you dive deep, and it's almost like we're excavating different strata. And because you go so far back into the past, where there's a lot of history in my book as well. But you go so far back that kind of age where mythology blends with history blends with kind of folk stories, and you kind of excavate that layer of Sri Lankan history. The book starts in Mimure and around Lakegala, that area, which is a part of the country that probably most people have never been to, but a part of the country that's just absolutely full of stories as you write about. What is it that made you want to go that far back, and what is that drew you to that period of history?
Well, the fact that we had this bit of land which was overlooking the Knuckles, we now actually live there, my husband and I. And it's so rich with legend and folklore, because that's it's always been an isolated part of Sri Lanka. So the villages in the Knuckles, particularly the northeast face, which is closest to us, we are at the foot of the mountains. The stories are incredible, and they're said with such conviction that the people there don't believe that it's folklore or myth or anything. They'll talk of Ravana. Oh yes, he almost like, yeah, he just left yesterday, sad, you just missed him, kind of thing. Which is like, and you come from Colombo and you're like, wow, where, how did we miss out on this whole rich past? And that's, I think, what sort of triggered my deep interest. Up to that point, the stories I'd heard from the time as a kid, spending time in the jungles with my family, with my parents, and hearing stories from trackers and, hunters and farmers. But then this seemed to be sort of the least known, but in a way it was this sort of jewel encrusted treasure which, you just could get a glimpse of. So I think that's how my next book came out, Ravana's Lanka. But I think we have so many stories to tell, and I could say you picking up a lot of those, and though you didn't go deep into it, I could, you definitely talk to people, and you hear of the the man from Mana, or the people in Kathankudi, and there is so much more to tell.
Yeah.
Which I think obviously you've chosen a path or a level to narrate this on.
Yeah.
Which is very current, but
yeah. I guess it's a case of breadth versus depth, and I think you definitely kind of delve into your topics and delve into the stories that you tell very deep and dwell on them, whereas I'm, partly because of the way that we traveled, as you mentioned, I just kind of kicked around from place to place. I had a certain number of days that I was allowed to be off work. I had a budget that I went over despite traveling in buses and staying in the cheapest places, so it was very much just that was partly just because of the way it had to be, and I wanted to get across as much of the island as possible. But I think we probably started from different places. It was kind of absurdities and ironies of modern Sri Lankan life that were the kind of starting point for the inspiration for me to write the way that I did.
Yeah.
Was just noticing the conversations that people would have at bus stops, or the watching our politics and see the kind of joke on us that was being played every day. Those were the starting points for a lot of inspiration. Then I ended up, I as a writer, I'm always drawn to comic writing. And I think the first bits of the book that I started writing were the jokes, and then the book kind of materialized around it. So that was how I went about it. And I think with both you're right, there's that kind of colonial angst, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because it's something that often is alluded to in literature and writing, but is also, even a period as recent as that, feels not very well understood by many people around the country. There's a part in my book where I went searching for this torture tree in Nuva Parnagama, where many people had been hanged during the Great Rebellion, or the Kapatipal Rebellion, whatever you want to call it, of 1817, 1818, and even people in that village didn't really know much about this story, and you had to go and find somebody else. There happened to be a monk who was very knowledgeable about it, who told me all about it. But is that something that drives your writing as well, wanting to tell our history in an honest and unvarnished way?
Completely. I mean, I almost feel compelled to tell the stories that have been lost or hidden, and some of the stories have been hidden for various reasons. But yeah, they've been lost, and I think we've I don't know, call it an island mentality. I don't know what it is, but we are not curious enough, I think, and unless we are sort of spoon-fed. And then, my God, like, oh, really? And people get so interested in something which actually should be so much a part of who we are.
Oh.
And I think that in a way that is part of something, I think that could really shape our identity, which I think we have really lost after colonial experience. So I mean, I understand that values can be turned on their heads, ridiculed, and then you get very confused. And because we are an island, maybe you get confused more easily than say the subcontinent.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, and then when you offer these narrations and you take people, and it's like, it's not like these roads didn't exist. Like the routes you have, I'm sure there have been people you've heard about people who've actually taken the same route you have.
Yeah.
And that's, I think they're waiting for someone to take them or guide them or.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you had a reading.
So promiscuity had in fact been a feature of Candian society long before the 19th century. In his famous account of captivity in Kandy between 1660 and 1680, British sailor Robert Knox had also been struck by the local appetite for carnal adventure. Quote, "There is nothing so common as whoredom, so that youth are bred up to whoredom," he writes of the Candians. The woman reckons herself as much obliged to the man for his company as he does for hers. In extramarital affairs, the women are very expert, it being their continual practice, to keep their design from the husband's knowledge, though by his own experience he cannot be ignorant of women's devices. And unless he can catch them in the act, he doth not much trouble himself to prove himself a cuckold. Cuckolds being so common that it is not here regarded, says Robert Knox. How attitudes have flipped. Following British conquest, sexual norms became warped, and the island recast its historical liberal Buddhist tradition in a brooding conservative vein. Where women once went bare-breasted in public, for example, there are now high schools that frown on mothers wearing sleeveless tops when they drop off children. Where it was once natural for prospective spouses to cohabit before marriage, present-day parents who so much as suspect their offspring are engaged in sexual relationship will at the very least set such children on fire. This adopted conservatism has led to all sorts of strange social phenomena. I'll stop there. But what you said, not understanding, and I see that Robert Knox called this whoredom, but this was actually polyandry, or the Candian marriage system, where you could have multiple husbands.
Yeah.
And to a Britisher, Victorian Britisher, it was mind-boggling.
Yes.
So he had to sort of point fingers at it and scowl upon it, but I mean,
it wasn't just there was Robert Knox, and there were some other British travelers of the era that I read, or not just British but European travelers of the era that I read. So polyandry is one thing that, as you say, he sounds like he's describing without knowing what it is, and being scandalized by a woman having more than one husband. Or having relationships, having sexual relations with more than one person. But there's also, beyond that, there was also promiscuity, which was, even outside of kind of polyandry's kind of marital relationship situation, that was accepted and
social contracts.
Yeah, there was a social contract there, but there were other relations, I think, in the Candian kingdom, and which is not just written about by British travelers, but also by Sinhalese of the time, other writers of the time. There is a huge amount of erotic literature which Gannanath Ubesekara, the great kind of anthropologist, historian, writes about. And then there's art all through Sri Lankan history from various periods that is very sexual in nature. The most common example that everyone cites is the lovers at Isurmini, the sculpture. But there's also so much Kandyan art, and even the graffiti on the Sigiri mirror wall is very lewd in places. So this was something that was part of our history, at least in parts of our history, and it's something that this kind of sexual freedom was something that was there before. The one big thing that happened that changed it to what it is now is this colonial period, and I wouldn't put it all on. I wouldn't pin it all on Victorian morals. I think Anagarika Dharmapala, the Buddhist revivalism movement, which in itself was a response to colonialism and its strictures, that was a huge driving force in basically bringing a degree of conservatism in the Sinhala Buddhist population that wasn't there before. This idea, this concept that Sri Lanka has always been an extra conservative country, it's just not true. You don't have to go that far back into our past to find that it really wasn't.
So again, it's this lack of knowledge about original identity, and it's this tendency to carry some colonial Victorian torch of prudishness, which again stems from this not knowing that we actually were not this prudish and narrow-minded and restricted. So for instance, you'll go into a village, and on a Poya day you'll see the women with even their ankles covered, and to me the only difference between a Sinhala Buddhist village on a Poya day and a Wahhabi enclave is that one wears white and one wears black. Honestly, it's ridiculous. But this is because I think we've forgotten who we are. No one is making the effort to find out, and so again, maybe people like you and I are sort of burdened ourselves with this to share this knowledge of a culture which was not narrow-minded, more in sync with maybe the hippies of the 70s.
Yeah, it's I always find it strange when kind of liberalization, and we have perhaps become more liberal than we were in the 50s and 60s, is kind of deemed as becoming kind of embracing Western liberal values, when actually it's more like it's more appropriate to call it decolonizing.
Yes.
And I'm talking about even things such as like homosexual relationships were fairly commonplace in the Kandyan kingdom. I wanted to read some of your book as well. This goes back much further back in time, and this is one of the most fascinating stories that I read in Line of Lanka, and it's about the Nittawa, which, if listeners don't know, is a group of fairly small, fairly diminutive hominids that we believe, or you certainly make a strong point that strong claim that they were around in various jungles in Sri Lanka. We'll talk about that after I read. If the end of the day found the Nittawa far from a familiar cave, they would climb up the tallest trees and settle high in the canopy. They may not have leapt from one tree to another like the grey langur, but they must have competed for the same arboreal spaces. Branches would be broken and bent in tall calamander and ebony trees to create leafy platforms like the grey langur, but then covered with leaves for greater comfort and warmth. I imagine they huddled together against the cold winds of January, and on hearing the alarm calls of the grey langur and spotted deer, they lay still, warned of the leopard padding silently through the darkness. So it's almost like a group of hominids that was that we believe are now extinct, right? Or there are stories.
There have always been these stories of this hominid, this and there is no timeline on it. But what has given it credibility is that a very similar, almost identical story existed in Indonesia on the Flores Island. And then they actually discovered the remains of the fossils of this race. So similar thing, how they were, another forest dwelling community of, same another species actually committed genocide, identical to the story in Sri Lanka that the Vedas actually exterminated the Nitabo. And then even more recently in South Africa, they discovered in this cave, which was called the Cave of the Rising Star or something, but they've named Homo naledi. Identical, small, maybe 3.5 foot species. So that they did exist, and they most likely existed in parallel with the modern human. It seems very likely that we also had this, because the legend again is pretty strong. And I mentioned in the Line of Lanka that people have reported handholds on rocks. Very close together, where something climbed frequently using their fingers, bigger than Langer. Diligently, I say, Indonesia and South Africa, it was accidental find. It was some cavers who went into a deeper recess and then suddenly discovered this. And in fact, when they were excavating it further, National Geographic called for small belt archaeologists, because the cave opening into that recessed area was so narrow.
Wow, yeah.
So they had to give a physical description for application.
Right,
So, yeah.
right.
But that's like really a big effort to look for this, and we've not done anything of the kind.
Right. Yeah. I found that story so, and it also is possible that they may have kind of mixed with the Vedas and then kind of become part of that bloodline as well.
Absorb like we absorb the Veda.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of stories. Were there any stories that you were especially excited to tell during? I mean, either of these books. Were there one story where you were struck by, you have to immediately write it down?
Well, I think in the Line of Lanka, it was definitely my discovering the positioning of the 4 Samandevales, and which is what became the Line of Lanka. In Ravana's Lanka, actually, these tracks on the rock, which we'd been hearing about for years up in the Knuckles, and finally made this trek, a 2-day trek up the mountains, and we were shown these incisions on the rock, very precise, and down the middle of it there's this little brown line which can't explain it unless you say it's a metal insert which has rusted over the years, and it runs, they run all over the rock. And I've said in the book, we didn't quite believe this story till we saw it, and then we had no other explanation, and the villagers called it Ravana's Kochipar or Ravana's train tracks, and this doesn't look like anything else. So I really wanted to research this and write this and come up with some story and explanation, not story, explanation. And I don't have an explanation.
Right. That's a fascinating place to end the discussion on these books. Thank you all for joining us on this Gratiaen Pod. Thanks to the British Council as well for their support of the pod. We'll catch you on the next one.